Hey, what's up, fellas? How you doing? Man, Antonelli here.
Hey, what's going on, guys? How we doing? Matt Antonelli here. Today we're answering your questions. Actually, this isn't a question. This is a comment that I get a decent amount of times on my videos. Sometimes I think it's just from people that are just angry. Excuse me, just, sitting in their basement in their underwear watching YouTube videos and they're mad at the world. But I do think I also get this from maybe people that are serious and don't really understand what it takes to be a good coach. And so I want to delve into this and really talk about coaching and my experience with coaches. And so what I get every now and then is a bunch of different versions of this, but basically it's you weren't a good player in the major leagues. Sometimes it's much harsher than that, but they'll say you didn't hit well in the major leagues, even though it was only 50 at-bats. How can you even be a coach? How can you teach somebody how to hit when you hit 200 in your major league career? Right? So I get some form of that, and I think it's just the silliest thing ever. But I want to talk about this because first, just because you're a good player doesn't mean you're a good coach. And just because you're a bad player or were a bad player doesn't mean you can't be a good coach. Bad player, good player, it's relative. Like, you don't have to be, like, what is a good player? Does a good player mean you have to make the Hall of Fame in the major leagues? Does it mean, if you're a good high school player, does that mean you're a good player? So, good and bad player, I don't know how we're going to define that. But regardless, you don't have to be a great player or even a good player to be a good coach. All right? One of the first things I say to people, and I get this a lot actually, I'll be talking hitting with players or parents, and I'll get somebody that says, this one guy was talking about hitting with me, and he said something that was different from your opinion on hitting. They'll be talking to me, and they'll say, and I told him, why would I listen to you? I'm going to listen to Matt because he played in the major leagues, or because he played college baseball, or because he was a first round draft pick. And I always stop him. I say, hold on a minute. Please don't ever listen to what I have to say or believe what I have to say or do what I'm saying just because I played at a high level, just because I played in the major leagues, or just because I was drafted, or just because I played college baseball. If that's the reason why you're listening to somebody, well, then you should stop. You should stop listening. Like, that's not a good reason to listen to someone just because they played at a high level. That doesn't mean they're right. And like I said, just because you're a good player doesn't mean you're a good coach. And just because you haven't played at a high level doesn't mean you can't be a good coach. I've been around so many people that were great players that couldn't coach very well and couldn't connect with players and just didn't understand whether it's hitting or fielding or pitching or whatever. And then vice versa. I've been around tons of people that didn't play at a high level, and I'm like, man, this guy's one of the best coaches I've been around. And if you think about it, I just thought for a few minutes and I jotted a couple names down, but just think about professional sports and think about some of the great coaches. Were all the great coaches great players? No. Like, my favorite coach of all time, Bill Belichick. I'm a huge Patriots fan. Like, Belichick says it all the time. He always says, like, I'm not out there tackling and throwing touchdowns and all that stuff. And he always says, and thank goodness I'm not out there because it wouldn't be very pretty. Like, he played at Wesleyan, and he wasn't a good player. And he's one of the greatest coaches, if not the greatest coach in the history of any sport. But there's so many guys. There's like Tony La Russa. Like, I looked up his stats. He hit 199 and 176 big league at bats. Like, Greg Popovich played at Air Force, didn't play in the NBA. Red Auerbach. Like, I just kept writing down names. And also there's a lot of coaches that were great players that also made good coaches. But my point is, you don't have to be a great player to be a great coach. There's been plenty of guys that weren't great players that were great coaches. So forget about the playing career and focus on the coaching ability. There's been a lot of great players that weren't great coaches. I've heard a bunch of interviews on Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds is one of the best hitters to ever play. And this was actually a funny story. I'll tell it real quick. When Barry was the hitting coach, and I've never been around Barry Bonds, the hitting coach, so I don't know personally. I'm just going by a couple of stories I heard. And the one story I heard was when Giancarlo Stanton was struggling on hitting sliders. And he was talking to Barry Bonds when Barry Bonds was the hitting coach, and he said, you know, Barry, I'm having trouble laying off that slider down and away. I just can't stop swinging at it. What should I do? And Barry said, well, you know, just don't swing at it. And he's like, and Giancarlo's like, I know, but I'm having trouble hitting it. I can't hit it, and I can't stop swinging at it. And Barry was like, well, just don't swing at it. If you can't hit it, don't swing at it. And Giancarlo was like, I'm not trying. I don't want to swing it. I'm trying to not swing at it, but I keep swinging at it. How do I? And they just kept going back and forth. And sometimes, again, not always, really good players can really coach. But in this instance, I think for some players that were great as players, they were great. When they become coaches, sometimes you just did it. You don't even know how you did it. You just did it, right? And so maybe for Barry Bonds, he was just able to recognize that slider and just knew, nope, not a strike, not going to swing at it. But how do you teach that to somebody? Maybe you can't. Or maybe he was just so good, he didn't know what he did. And how do you explain to someone when you don't even know what you did? You just hit. And I talk about this a lot when I was a player. Now, I was not Barry Bonds, obviously, nowhere close to it. But for a lot of my career as a player, I didn't know a whole lot about what I was doing. I just happened to be good at it. Like in high school, I hit, and in college, I hit, and I got drafted high. And in the first few years of the minors, I hit. If you ask me how I hit, I don't know. I would just tell you what everyone told me for 100 years and what people have said forever. Probably the same old silly stuff that it's now kind of been proven as technology has gotten better that didn't really happen. But I'd tell you all the same silly stuff like, you know, swing down on the ball and be short to the ball and keep your eye on the ball and stuff that's probably not super helpful. And try to hit hard ground balls and all that stuff. And again, I just happened to hit well, but I couldn't tell you why. And then all of a sudden I couldn't hit anymore. And I couldn't figure out what to do because I didn't know why I hit in the first place. And so that is actually, that point in my career is what made me want to start to study stuff and want to be a coach. Because I was like, man, I went from being really good, not having any clue why I was doing it, and now I can't hit. And there's a problem here. And I went through a lot of coaches that had no idea how to help me. And in my experience playing pro ball, a lot of the coaches in pro ball were former players that were good players. Almost all of them played in the major leagues. Now, I'm not saying they all weren't good coaches. There were good coaches. But there were some that I thought weren't that great at coaches, some that really couldn't help me. And especially in pro ball then. And it's starting to get a little bit away from that. But at that point in pro ball, it was mostly like guys played Major League Baseball. They finished playing. They loved the game. They loved the sport. They didn't know what to do. Hey, I'll get into coaching. Baseball is what I know. And so they got into coaching. And then they coached two ways. One, they just said what they did, right? Well, this worked for me, so it's got to work for everybody else, when that isn't always the case because everyone's different. So they would just tell you what they did. Or two, they would just tell you what other coaches had told them. Same thing for hundreds of years. All those baseball things that you always hear, you know, the same thing, the A to B swing, the down on the ball, all those things that you hear. That's what they said. And when those things didn't work, when I tried those things, I was like, man, I still can't hit. Then we were at a crossroad, and it was like, well, no, I don't know. So can playing at a high level help you be a good coach? Yeah, I mean, it can help you in some ways, too. I think a lot of times, you know, approach stuff, situational stuff, those type of things. You've had a coach that has been in there and faced, you know, when you get to the big leagues and you're trying to hit a 95-mile-an-hour fastball with run and a 92-mile-an-hour slider, or maybe a 102-mile-an-hour fastball, things that you've never seen before. Yes, sometimes if you've got a coach that has seen that before and had success against that, then maybe that can help you. Maybe you can talk about, well, listen, when I faced a guy that did this, like this is the approach that I would have on him, try this approach, and maybe that works. But like I said, it doesn't always happen that way because some players don't, again, the Barry Bonds example, I just see the ball and hit it, right? A lot of times the great players, they keep it super simple. See it and hit it. See it and hit it. Like I had a lot of coaches say it to me before when I was playing. I'd be struggling. I'd be like, "God, I can't hit a ball to save my life. What do you want me to do?" "Hey, man, just see the ball and hit the ball, man. Just keep it simple, stupid. Kiss." And I'd be like, "I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can, and I'm 0 for 25. Like, I can't get any simpler, and I can't get a hit." So I think it's a really interesting comment. I don't think it's true. You don't have to be a great player to be a great coach. If you are a great player, you could still be a good coach, but it's not guaranteed. All right, so if you're a player, again, just make sure that you're not just going to instructors or going to play for coaches just because they played at a high level. I think that's silly. You want to do your due diligence and make sure that they are actually a good coach and they can instruct. Again, whether, maybe you're going to a pitching instructor. Just because he pitched in the big leagues doesn't mean he can help you. If he didn't pitch in the big leagues, it doesn't mean he can't help you. He could, but you got to do your homework and you got to take what somebody says and don't just believe it because of their credentials, but actually think about it. Go do some research. If they say something, go and see if it's, is this what guys are doing in the major leagues? I always say when we talk about hitting, we show a lot of video on big league hitters that are really successful, right? We're looking at their mechanics. And so this is the way, I always talk about hitting or anything in the big leagues. It's like survival of the fittest. The best swings typically end up being there for a long time. If a guy's successful for a really long time, it's probably because he's got a really good swing. So let's look at what's he doing. When I call them core principles. So we start looking at that. So if someone comes to a lesson with me and we're talking about core principles and I tell you all these things, well, you can go home and look and start looking at big leaguers. Is this what they're doing? This is what Coach Matt said. Are they actually doing that? Don't just listen because he played pro ball, but does this stuff actually make sense? So hopefully that helps you guys out. Let me know if you have any more questions in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel, share the video with all your friends, all that good stuff. Thank you to our patrons on Patreon who support the channel. We really appreciate that. Don't forget to hit the notification bell for our other videos. And that's all we got. We'll talk to you later.